Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this webinar towards net zero and the green recovery. I'm Joanne Pitt, SIPRA's Local Government Policy Manager, and I'm going to moderate today's discussion. This is one of a series of webinars SIPRA is hosting, where we're examining a range of issues for public finance professionals, both those emanating from the pandemic as well as those matters preceding it, from a technical and professional point of view. Today, we are taking a look at the very important role that authorities will play in the green agenda moving forward. In this webinar, Committee on Climate Change Chair, Lord Deben, will describe the key role that local authorities have been doing in reducing emissions and helping places adapt to climate change. He'll be making recommendations to government about how it can accelerate the delivery of that challenge, and to local authorities on how they can have the biggest impact. We also have the pleasure in hearing from the ADEPT President on how place directors and finance directors need to work together, and hear about one of the councils and how they have placed this into operation, and how the Carbon Trust is helping to deliver practical tools for integrating climate impact assessments in their policy and budget decisions. So I'd like to thank our three speakers, and before I hand over though, can I just remind everyone that we really want this to be an interactive event, and this is an opportunity for you to put questions and comments forward to this panel. You're able to submit questions via the question panel on the GoToWebinar dashboard that you should have on your screen. Once the presentations have finished, I'll put these forward to our speakers. You can submit questions at any time, so there's no need to wait until the end of the presentation, but I will wait with those questions on the screen until our speakers have finished. So I would like to now have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker, Lord Deben. Lord Deben, who is now chairman of the Committee on Climate Change. He was also the longest serving Secretary of State for the Environment in the UK. And he has 16 years of top level ministerial experience, which include Minister for Agriculture and Fisheries and Minister for London Employment. So a warm welcome then to Lord Deben.
I have been muted by something or other, but there we are. Let me start again. I just want to say what a pleasure it is to talk to people from local authorities, because as far as the Climate Change Committee is concerned, we're very clear that regional and local authorities have the most important role to play in our battle to meet net zero in 2050. Now, the reason for that, of course, is that so much of what we have to do has to be done at a local level, and so many of the people who we have to influence are people who are best influenced at a local level. So everything that I say is aimed both at local authorities as well as government, but I understand so clearly that the actual delivery is going to be very widely done within the parameters laid down by the government, by local authorities. And I can assure you that whenever we are talking to the government, which is on a very regular basis, we make this point very clearly, because it is important that local authorities should have the resources and the information which they need to be able to do the job properly. Now, on Monday, we'll be publishing the 6th carbon budget. And in a sense, this is the most important budget that we have ever produced, because it is going to take us to the end of the 2030s very nearly. And by the time we get there, we'll have had to have done all the real heavy lifting if we are to get to 2050 with net zero. And so what we're laying down now is the way in which we do that, the route map in detail, it'll have it will have 1,000 pages showing how we do what we've already said we can do. Last year we were asked by the government, will you tell us, can we get to net zero? And if we can, how long will it take and what will it cost? And we told them that they could do it, but probably not before 2050, but we certainly could do it then, and that it would cost us something between 0.5% and 2% of GNP each year. Now that's well within the amount that one could reasonably spend. It's certainly the same kind of amount as we thought we would need to get to 80% reduction in our emissions. And even before that, it was the figure that we expected to do when we were thinking of very much lower changes. The truth is, we have got a long way at a much lower price, because what has happened is that the costs have fallen. When we committed ourselves to an offshore wind industry, we found we'd committed ourselves to a means of generation which has become one of the cheapest that exists. And so we find many areas where during this period we will be gaining directly advantages. And for that reason, when you come to read the 6th carbon budget, you will see clearly that the cost is now going to be very much closer to the lower end of that bracket than to the top. That's good news for all of us. It's particularly good news for the large number of investors whom we will depend upon to do this job, because of course much, indeed most, of the spending is going to come from the private sector. And what coronavirus has taught us is that we really need to have a new way of running the economy. Most of what we're asking people to do, most of the investments that we shall need, are precisely the things that we need to do to restart and reform the economy after COVID-19. Building back better, a greener future, all these slogans happen to be true. That is the way we have to do it. But the crucial thing is that we do it and not merely talk about it. I was very pleased to read the Prime Minister's 10-point plan. It's a good plan. It covers most of the things that we in the Climate Change Committee have asked him to cover. But it will mean nothing unless it is done. And I have to say that, as well as my congratulations that that is the 10-point plan, I have a warning, which is that we really do need the kind of roadmap that leads us to that, and we need it at once, because urgency is absolutely at the heart of all that we do. If we don't do it now, it'll cost us a great deal more money. If we don't do it now, it'll be much more difficult. If we don't do it now, then other people will not follow us. And that, of course, is the special position of Britain at this moment. Not only will we be the president of the G7, but more importantly for this purpose, we shall be hosting the COP26. This is the conference of the parties in which we bring together everybody who promised things in Paris, promised that they would do a great deal, promised that they would meet really ambitious targets. But even then, those targets aren't good enough, and some of them have not so far been moving fast enough towards them. So in the meeting in Glasgow, we're going to have to ramp that up. And there's no way we can get other people to do what we want them to do unless we do it ourselves. So we're looking very carefully to ensure that the government commits itself, as it has, then commits itself to a real figure for the reduction by 2030, then helps others to reach those same high standards, and produces during this coming year a very clear roadmap, one which is really going to be fulfilled. Now today, we have published the response to the letter which we were asked to give to the government in order to say what we think the nationally determined commitment, the NDC, should be. We worked that out from our work for the 6th carbon budget. And what we've said to the government is that it should be at least a 68% reduction. That's the least we should do. It's a very tough thing. It means we will move very significantly further towards the net zero target. But it will be necessary, and it will be necessary to get other people to join in. And of course, we're in a very fortunate position. The fact is that China has committed itself to net zero. Japan and South Korea have committed themselves too. And now, with the election of Mr. Biden in the United States, we have a party and a president committed to rejoining the world and for the United States to place its great strength behind this enormous task. So we're in a good position, but it is ours to lose if we don't take the steps we need to take. And so the Climate Change Committee will be more and more determined to press on delivery because we have no time to waste. And that delivery, as I said when I began, is going to be a delivery by the partnership between the central government, between the national devolved governments, between them and their local authorities and their regional authorities. And I'm particularly concerned that this should be an immediate partnership. If you take, for example, the job that we've got to do to get rid of the enormous amount of emission that comes from home heating, we can only do that if local authorities are able to help people do this. The local authorities are able to do things about publicly owned buildings and housing. We can only do this if houses can be done together. And the only people who know about the streets and the individuals and the people who are going to have to make these choices are the local authorities. So we look to you very much. And I also want to commend those local authorities who already are doing remarkable things. Take Leeds, for example. Leeds City Council, working with Leeds University and with a much wider group of the general public, together they are creating the circumstances in which Leeds has its own equivalent of the Climate Change Committee. It's a commission which advises what Leeds needs to do. So successful has that been that the government has given some money for us to be able to expand that, and I'm happy to be the chairman of the group that is doing that. So we've reached out, and it's Belfast and Edinburgh first, but also we've got a great deal being done around the country. Places like Bristol, Cambridge, Greater Cambridge are only two examples, and there are many beyond it, things like the Manchester Hub, for example. And so what we need to do is not only to encourage government to enable regional and local government to do their job, but we want local government too to do their job. And I can give you a single example. If we get it wrong, then the public will know. You only have to see the problems which Kensington and Chelsea has had because it decided to scrap a cycle lane, when cycling and walking going to be a hugely important thing. Now, it may be that they will explain very clearly why this was necessary and what they're going to do instead. But the first reaction which we saw from the press was, why are they doing that in the terms of the battle against climate change? And I think we all have to realize that it's not just the fruits of success when we get it right, but it's going to be an area where local authorities are going to be under very considerable scrutiny. Those that are less successful in having a proper charging structure for electric vehicles, in getting walking and cycling running properly, in ensuring that district heating schemes are really going to work, those are going to be pilloried. So it's a win and lose situation. Those that succeed will be contributing to the biggest material battle of our time. We have to win this because there is no vaccination for climate change. And we need to change the way we live in order to make sure that we can live more fruitfully and more abundantly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lord Deben. I think that's an excellent phrase. There's no vaccination for climate change. So I think that's certainly an excellent place to finish on. And thank you very much for your contributions. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce our next speaker. And our next speaker is Nigel Wrigler. Nigel is president of ADEPT. He's the Director of Environment and Community Services at South Gloucester. His previous roles include Commissioning Director of Communities and Infrastructure at Gloucester County Council. And Nigel was also responsible for setting up the Beacon Council scheme for the Improvement and Development Agency. He's going to cover in the sort of next 10 minutes the importance of how place directors and finance directors need to work together in order to deliver on this green agenda. I'm going to hand the slides over to Nigel, and he's going to take through his presentation. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time for the communication and the slide control to get over. So if he starts talking and it takes a while for the slides to move on, don't worry, it will happen. Nigel, can I ask you to take forward your presentation, please?
Cool. Yes, of course, Joe. Thank you for that. And for those of you, well, good afternoon. And for those of you who don't know what ADEPT stands for, it stands for the Association of Directors of Environment, Economy, Planning and Transport. So those of us who are place directors across local authorities across the country, and we're a multifaceted association because we draw our membership from place directors in county, unitary and combined authorities, but also from chief executives and directors of local enterprise partnerships, and we have very strong corporate partners from the private sector as well. So we're a broad church of organisations seeking to manage our places at that local authority level. Ooh, now, are the slides going to move on?
Are you okay to do that? I can take back control if they're not.
Well, whether they're not moving on for me at the moment, I'm afraid.
Nigel, why don't you talk? I'll take them back control and then I'll move them on, okay?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So,
okay.
So I think Lord Deben has given us a preview of his committee's publication next week, and I just have to say it is very reassuring as a place director that the committee on climate change exists as a source of reassurance and definitely a source of inspiration in terms of tackling the challenge that we face. But I thought it'd be useful to start to frame some of the discussion that place directors and finance directors have in common at the moment, and where we need the conversation to blossom. The government published its the UK's first green finance strategy back in July 2019, and that had two strands to it. One was about financing green, which was about mobilising public and private finance to support clean and resilient growth. And the second strand was about greening finance itself, so mainstreaming climate and environmental risks and opportunities into financial markets and decision making. More recently, as Lord Deben referred to, we've had the PM's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. 12 billion of government investment, not all new money, but significant investment none the least, to create 250,000 green jobs across the country and contribute to meeting the net zero target. The plan has actions to decarbonise energy, transport, buildings, but also to protect and restore the natural environment. And point 10 within the plan, most reassuringly, was around innovation in finance and developing new technologies and making the City of London the global centre of green finance. Running in parallel to that, last week I think we had the spending review and budget and another raft of announcements around funding for flood defences, for tree planting, for levelling up, and another 40 million for the Green Recovery Investment Fund. All investment in places and tackling the climate emergency at a local level. And then hidden away around some of this is the review of the Green Book that's going on at the moment within Treasury, and very much a focus on how do we appraise the environmental impacts of programmes and projects to meet net zero, and to provide a place-based focus for the investments that we do make. Only yesterday, the LGA, in partnership with local partnerships, launched their green finance support for local authorities, and there was an event yesterday. And obviously, as Lord Deben referred to, we've got COP26 in 11 months' time. And again, on the PM has appointed Mark Carney as a financial advisor to help mobilise ambitious actions from across the financial system in the run-up to the summit. So I think at a national level, lots of things for place directors and finance directors to be getting their minds round. And we're really pleased from an ADEPT point of view. Climate change has been writ large in our strategic plan now for a number of years, and probably two key things this year. One was the publication of something called the Blueprint for Accelerating Climate Action and Green Recovery at a Local Level. And I'll come back to that at a moment, but recognising the importance of the relationship between place directors and finance directors, which is the next slide, Joe. We published earlier this year in May a Green Finance Toolkit, which came out of our Excellence in Place Leadership programme, and a number of sessions within that, which had input from private investors and consultants, including Amy, Aviva, HSBC, KPMG, were able to come together with case studies from Greater Manchester, Cambridgeshire, Bristol, Swindon and other places, and really help place directors start to think about the range of resources, of advice, of support that they're going to need to have and deploy if they're going to work ever more creatively with government, with the commercial sector and with NGOs to unlock the sorts of finances that we're going to need to tackle the climate emergency. And I think that toolkit, if we could move on again, has thrown up a number of challenges for councils. And I think I think for me, this is the sort of the crux of the discussion for place directors and finance directors to be continuing to develop, about thinking about the new perspectives, the new lenses that we can start to use to think about the outcomes we're trying to achieve as council, and the value that we ascribe to those. So as Lord Deben has pointed out, that the challenge is around net carbon neutral by 2050 and preparing to be resilient to the impacts of at least 2 degrees temperature rise in the same timescales. And it's those perspectives and the new currencies of carbon and adaptation that we're going to need to understand and think through by tackling these agendas. Where are we adding value to the economy and value to wider society? Because I think that's where we need to continue our thinking, so we can conceive of new markets, conceive of new supply and demand relationships within them, and understand how we're going to access some of those new sources of finance. And at a practical level, actually, and I'm acutely aware in my own local authority area, but it's playing out across the country, how do we as local authorities package up all of those climate emergency opportunities, which are often dispersed and somewhat disjointed, but package them up at a local level and offer them back to people who are wanting to invest for a variety of outcomes, and some very new roles for local authorities. And amongst that, which will require new creative partnerships to deliver the projects and the programs that we'll need at the scale and at the pace of delivery that we will need. And then I think if we move on again, please. And that's the challenge, I suppose, for place and finance directors. I think innovation brings that challenge in terms of finance, in terms of risk, in terms of governance for us organisationally as local authorities. And I've put new conversations there on the slide, but I think it is as much about place directors and finance directors continuing to work as closely as they already do, but to develop their language, the language of carbon and the language of adaptation, and start to think about the capacities and the skills that we're going to need moving forward. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the capabilities that we already have. You will always need more capacity and potentially more skill, but you know, if we just think as local authorities about some of the things we can celebrate, whether it's large scale conversion of street lighting to LED, if it's renewable projects, if it's modern design buildings that are going to be around over the next 100 years that are already net zero carbon and already resilient enough to adapt to the climate change that we're going to see, whether it's new flood alleviation schemes, we can all point to projects that are absolutely essential and where the investment is being made now for the future. But also in terms of our processes, in terms of, are we really reflecting the risk of climate emergencies in our organisational risk registers and processes? Do we really have sound decision-making processes that are allowing us to think about the implications of net zero carbon and adaptation in terms of the decisions that we're making day to day? And I think if we continue to push that debate as place directors and finance directors, we'll find that ever more corporate approach, and the benefit of that is around ever more resilient communities and ever more efficient and effective economies. And I think it will make it as easy make it easier to think about the nature of the finances we need and how we use supply chains and all the other levers that we use day to day within local authorities. We could just move on again, please. I did say I'd come back to the blueprint, because the blueprint for accelerating climate action and green recovery at a local level was a new departure, I suppose, for us from an ADEPT point of view. And I think one where place directors and finance directors should come together, because it It is a set of asks developed by local government bodies, by academic institutions and by non-governmental organisations. And it's a set of shared policy asks of government around the powers and resources that we need as councils. And I think driven very much by the NGOs, by the likes of Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth, recognising exactly as Lord Deben said, that well-resourced local government is central to mobilising local businesses and communities at the scale and the pace that we're going to need to tackle the climate emergency. And as with so many things, COVID hit in the middle of the work. So on the slide we also included 5 immediate priorities for a green recovery. And so just to draw those comments to a close, the blueprint sits there. We're encouraging councils to sign up and to support that. And if you go to the ADEPT homepage, that it'll walk you through how to do that as a council or a professional body or academic institution or an NGO, all of the players that need to come together. So I suppose as a concluding comment, we're only going to tackle the climate emergency if we can mobilise our communities and businesses to act at scale and pace. Local authorities are central to making that happen. Place directors have a key role to play in defining the what needs to be achieved in terms of net carbon zero and adapting to 2 degrees of warming. But I think finance, government, procurement colleagues will be absolutely instrumental in shaping what not only what happens but how it happens, and make sure it happens in the right way. So I think from an ADEPT point of view, we're really excited by the opportunity to collaborate with SIPFA and to bring place directors and finance directors and their respective teams together to really drive this agenda forward at pace and scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel, for that. And yet we're delighted to be working with yourself as well as part of that. So certainly, SIPFA, we recognise the importance of sustainability and climate change from a finance point of view. Just a reminder that you can send in questions that we'll pick up at the end. So please keep your questions coming in. That would be really good. Last but by certainly no means least, it gives me great pleasure to be joined by Chitra Nadaraja, who is the Strategic Manager for Climate Change at Northamptonshire County Council. She has worked in the environment sector for over 25 years and is a manager of staff and local programmes and regional programmes in order to achieve the County Council's environmental policies and aspirations. She's currently leads a team developing and delivering the County Council's response to climate change, and that ensures that the Council will achieve its target for the Hampshire area to become carbon neutral by 2050. Chitra will, in her presentation, will provide an overview of the Council's response to climate, including the innovative approaches that are being taken and embedded into decision making. So Chitra, are you on the call? And I'm just going to run through your slides, so when you want me to change over, just let me know. Chitra, are you there?
Yes, it took a while for the mute button to kick in.
Yeah,
thank you. I'm actually from Hampshire County Council, not Northamptonshire. So I'm the Climate Change Manager at Hampshire County Council. And what I wanted to do is kind of give you a bit of background of our approach to this challenge, the targets we've set, and then really talk about how we're trying to embed this across the decision making within the County Council. So moving on to the next slide. Thank you. So uniquely, I think, as a local authority, we have actually set ourselves 2 targets. So we have the carbon neutrality target to 2050, and we very much followed national government's lead and the advice of the Committee on Climate Change, as Lord Deben stated earlier, to have that target for 2050 carbon neutrality. But we also included a target to be resilient to a 2-degree rise in temperature. As a local authority, we felt that actually this was probably really a critical role for us, because we are there to deliver services, and we have to make sure that those services are resilient, but also that our infrastructure, environment, and communities are also prepared. And these two targets really form a twin-track approach for everything that we do on climate change across the County Council. Worth saying that both targets do not just relate to our own assets. More importantly, they relate to the whole county area. So quite a significant challenge for us going forward. Next slide, please. So there's been a lot of discussion this afternoon, about the priorities going forward, the 10-point plan, and the areas that local authorities really have a significant role to play. So in setting out our strategy, we were very keen to establish what those priorities would be for Hampshire. And within each of those areas, we've set out the approach that we're going to take and the programs of activities that we're going to undertake to deliver that. We have two levels of approach. We've got an extensive action plan that covers the whole authority. Every single service within the authority is covered by that action plan. But we've got a more detailed and high-level framework that looks at those big actions within these strategic priorities. And you'll see at the bottom the icons. You've got transport, residential, buildings and infrastructure, energy, waste, natural environment, and the economy, and the green economy. And within each of those, we've identified some really significant programs of activity that we as a council will really have to take action on in order to meet our targets. For example, under residential, we're going to be looking at doing some significant retrofit programs, energy efficiency programs across the whole county area, as Lord Deben stated. That is a really important role for us to play in that arena with our local residents. So really significant areas of action that need to be taken. So there's sort of two levels, if you like, of activity, and that's actually quite challenging to manage and to ensure that we're kind of going ahead towards our targets. Next slide, please. So to make this a little bit more robust, we agreed with our members that we would develop what we're calling 2 decision tools, and they sit both together with our decision-making process. Now, the reason why we developed these tools was to provide an evidence-based and transparent approach to really embedding climate change into all our significant decisions. So every single policy, project, action that comes to any key decision day will have to undergo a process by which they assess themselves against 1, how much carbon are they emitting as part of this project, and 2, how resilient are they to a 2-degree rise in temperature. Now, the objective is for the tools to begin to be used at project initiation, because obviously that's where you will have the most opportunity to make those changes. So you can identify where the carbon emissions are coming from and look at whether you can reduce those emissions, or you can see how your projects may not be resilient to a 2-degree rise in temperature, and you can start to build resilience in. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So this is really critical for us. It's been quite a challenging approach. We've been working with the Carbon Trust to develop these 2 tools. The Carbon Tool is a new tool that we've developed with the Carbon Trust. The Resilience Tool is something that we've had as an authority for quite a few years, about 10 years, and we've refreshed it with the latest data on risks. So as I said, the tool will sit alongside the decision-making process, but we also want the tools to be used at project initiation. And the reason that we've kind of got them at both ends is to keep the tools mandatory and to make sure that everything that we do is scrutinized through a lens of climate change. We've put it as part of the decision process. But for the tools to be effective, they need to be used from the start. So this is what we're sort of embarking on. The tools have literally just been launched. So we're just in the process of piloting them. But this is a really critical step for us as an authority. And I think it's really about demonstrating that all the decisions that we make will now be looked at through the climate change lens. And that's not an easy feat, given the sort of scale of the work that we're doing across the county and across the authority itself, and the complexity of that decision making, because it's everything from children's services, adult services, libraries, highways, infrastructure, it's the whole work. So it's not just the sort of obvious projects when it comes to these decision tools, it's everything. If we move to the next slide. So this is just a flavor of the tools. There's, obviously you can't see a huge amount here, but it's just to give you an idea that the tools are not just a tick box exercise. They're not a small sort of yes, no answer. They are quite involved. They require some effort to be put in by the authors of those reports. And they give you a good amount of information in terms of how your projects will be contributing to carbon emissions, and also the resilience tool, how it will be resilient to climate change. And the idea is that the projects will take themselves through a series of questions and processes, and at the end, they will then be using the information that comes out of the tools to sit alongside all key decision reports. And as local authorities, all our key decision reports are public facing, so all that information will be available for the public to see and to understand that we have now started to really embed climate change in our thinking. Obviously, the tools are new, as I said, they're just starting to be rolled out. So there will be a lag in the system where lots of projects haven't been taking climate change into account, because unfortunately, as we all know, climate change dropped off the priority for a little while there, and it's come back very strongly. So we do anticipate that there will be projects coming through the pipeline that will find this challenging and may be challenged as well as to why they're not taking more account of climate change. But that's the process we have to go through. Next slide, please. So the resilience tool is about assessing climate risks against your project. So we've used the UKCP data to look at what those risks are for Hampshire area and how they might impact on your project. And we've provided some guidance about how those risks would impact you. So not necessarily the obvious things, but for example, adult social care, it might be something about medicine storage and heat waves. So quite complex again, but we've tried to keep this as simple as possible so that authors can really understand how to assess the risks associated with climate change on their projects, and then how they might be able to reduce those risks. And again, the outcomes of the resilience tool will be presented in the final papers. So each project will have to go through both tools as a mandatory element of the decision process. Next slide, please. So this is what we'll end up with in all of our decision reports. The highlighted part in yellow will be what sits within every single decision report going forward as of April 21 within Hampshire County Council. So as I said, this is a big step for us and quite a challenging one. The tools have been, a labour of love, if you like. I think they're one of the first that have been developed in terms of for a local authority level response. And we felt really strongly that this is something we wanted to lead on, and we wanted to do as soon as we could. We declared a climate emergency in June last year. We published our strategy in July this year, and we're now rolling out these tools. So we were trying to kind of keep that pace of activity going and really maintain the priority of climate change within the core of everything within the County Council. Next slide, please. So where we are at the moment, as I said, we're testing the tools, and we're using the Environment Department within the County Council as a sort of testing ground for that, because obviously a lot of projects within the Environment Department are very relevant. Highways, waste, for example, all sit within our Environment Department. We are looking to roll out the tools to the whole of the organisation from April 21, and at that point we'll also be sharing it with all of our districts. So they will have access to both tools, and they'll be able to use them if they want to themselves within their decision-making processes. And finally, the next slide. I just included some links for further information. We've got a really extensive climate change website where there's a huge amount of information about the work that we're doing on everything I've talked about today and more. And also just to highlight the Hampshire 2050 work, which I think is really relevant to a lot of the conversation happening today, because we're going to be doing some interesting work around green recovery, linking climate change and the green economy with the Hampshire 2050, which was really about setting out what our priorities were going to 2050 and what the risks were to Hampshire. And that's a really important piece of work for us to look at different ways in which we can kind of build back better, as Lord Deben said, but also looking at different ways in which we actually quantify how well our economy is doing and finding different approaches to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chitra, for that. And I think the practical examples that you've given in your slides are really, really useful. And I think that a lot of people watching this webinar will take that away as sort of such a practical application. So thank you very much to all our three speakers. And please remember you can put some questions in the question box, which is on the right-hand side of the GoToWebinar app. So you should be able to do that. What I'd like to do now is invite our speakers back to form a panel, a virtual panel in this digital world, and a couple of questions really to see if we can get some comments on things sort of to further the discussion really. Lord Deben, can I put this question to you, please? You talked about sort of the need for resourcing and ensuring that there was enough resources, and I think this was also picked up in the other speakers' questions. Just going back to last week's spending review, were you happy, and what were your thoughts about the money available for climate change within the spending review and generally in order to achieve the objectives that we've got?
Well, the announcements were very welcome, but until you have a real route map to see what you have to do, you can't measure up those resources with the demands. And the demands are the first thing you have to do. And then you can say, well, is there enough money to do this? Is there too much there, and should we have more there? How much of that should be dispersed? All those questions come when you have a very clear program. And it's not just for government spending. I mean, just take the concept of having an all-electric car sales system by 2030. You can't just let that go on. You actually have to say, what proportion do we want in 2022 and 2024 and 2026? And you need to know that, and you then need to know how you're going to link in your charging system with that, what extra resources local authorities and central government are going to have for that, as well as the private sector. So it really is not the devil in the detail, the necessity is in the detail. And so I don't think you can answer that question until we have seen the roadmap which the government has for each of these areas, and then look at the money and see whether it is satisfactorily accounted for.
Thank you. Chitra, I can see you nodding there. Did you want to add to that?
I mean, it's a really huge challenge. You know, we've had questions about how are we sort of setting our resource plan alongside our action plan and framework going forward. It's really almost impossible in some ways. You know, we've had to break down our program into 5-year budgets as well, which is kind of a standard approach, and look at the activities that we're going to be taking within those 5 years. But even then, the dependencies that we rely on to deliver some of those programs, like, for example, the residential retrofit, will be very much reliant on government funding. We've seen the Green Homes Grant coming through, which we can't predict. So, you know, we have to really kind of do our best to align our resources, given all the other priorities that we have as a local authority, and obviously given the massive financial hit that we've taken as a result of COVID. But, you know, climate change is still our top priority, or one of our top priorities. So yeah, the resourcing is a huge challenge for us.
Nigel, do you want to add just a final comment?
Yeah, I'd absolutely echo the comments so far, and I think I'm happy to go on the journey with the government if the announcements were a genuine start to the process, and I believe they are in terms of the financing. I think the area I'm less convinced about is some of the policy dissonance, if I call it that comes from government. Talking to civil servants yesterday, saying, you know, there are 40 odd different areas of government policy that have key roles to play in terms of delivering and helping local places deliver on the climate emergency. And I don't think anybody would believe for one moment that those are in alignment at the moment. So I think there's a whole debate to be had about resourcing and what we can afford in terms of this, but I'm not sure government is always helping local places at the moment in terms of its coherence of policy, and how that is helping local places do what needs to be done at pace and at scale.
Thank you for that. Another sort of question coming in. We've got the carbon budget, which is due out. I wonder if we could just sort of comment about what you might think would be in there and what you think would be most advantageous coming out of there, and what we might see in the headlines. Lord Deben, would you like to comment on the carbon budget?
Well, it's difficult to give a preview, if you see what I mean, because we're only going to produce it next Monday. But I think the headlines will certainly point to the affordability of this. I think they'll point to the urgency of this, and I think they will also point to the comprehensiveness of this. The point that Nigel's been making about the cross-government needs that we're talking here, cross-local authority needs, the cross-society needs that are going to be. It's a really important. That's why the Climate Change Committee, in its annual report of how well the government's doing, no longer just talks about the government or the Scottish government. It's actually dealing it department by department, because we have to bring home to different departments that they all have an important part to play. When the Department of Culture, Media and Sport gives money in the future, it's got to give money on the grounds that the money will be used in a climate suitable way, that it will make flooding less likely, that the theatre that is receiving a grant is going to use less energy, is going to shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy. All those things have got to be in the forefront. So what I think will come out of this is that we now will have a proper route map, which the government has now clearly got in its hands. And what it has to do is to fit into that the detailed route map and money for the period, obviously the immediate period, to get this underway. That is the way I think that the press will see it. It is, I have to say, even though I mean it's my team that has been doing it, it is one of the most remarkable documents that has ever been produced in climate change. It is the most extensive one, and it's based upon the greatest degree of economic and scientific research. So it really does provide the government with tools to do the job.
Thank you. I think we're certainly looking forward to seeing that next week. Nigel, sort of picking up on some of those ideas of sort of tools to do the job. You talked very much in your session about working with directors of finance and place. What do you think is sort of key to making that relationship a success?
Talking to each other is often a good start, and recognizing that it can sometimes be an easier discussion than you might think. And I know we can all probably think of finance colleagues who we feel sometimes are just there to say no. I think that's very rarely actually the case. I think what finance colleagues bring is an insight, a reality, a challenge that's absolutely essential and helps us as place directors and teams make sure the proposals we're bringing forward are sound and deliverable. And like I say, we've been, we work with our senior colleagues in local authorities day in, day out. So we're always talking, and quite often, actually, these days, because of people's individuals' value sets, you never quite know where your climate change champion or environmental champion is going to be in a senior leadership team. It might be vested in the chief executive, in the social services director, or the people director, in the place director, in the finance director, and increasingly across leadership teams within local government. It's in all of those and reflected in the political priorities and leaderships of authorities. So I think those conversations are becoming easier all the time. I think that the core of the discussion with finance colleagues is actually the availability of money, the flows of money, and what you need to do to get money and resources is going to be significantly impacted by climate change. And the sooner we understand that and start to have a common understanding with that in local authorities and how that impacts on our risk profiles, on our governance, on our treasury management, all the big ticket stuff for us, that's when we really start to be able to drive the agenda at pace and scale.
Thank you, Nigel. And just coming up towards the end of this, but this is very specifically a question addressed to you, Chitra. Do you sort of provide training for your resilience tool in your council? So if you could just sort of a minute response, that would be fantastic. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Yes, as part of the rollout of all of the tools, we're creating how-to guides, case studies. We've got a video how-to guide, a written how-to guide. A member of my team has been trained specifically to handhold authors in the first year of the rollout. So yeah, we provide all of that training as part of the rollout of the tools. But really important message, you don't need to understand climate change in any great detail to use the tools. That's what we wanted. You need to know your project in detail, but you don't need to understand climate change. The tool will help you do that.
Well, thank you very, very much. And it's really just for me to wrap that up now and thank you all for your time and expertise. It's been a fascinating session on climate change and a really important topic. From a practical point of view, the webinars will be available on the SIPFA YouTube channel shortly. So if anybody who's watching this would like to subscribe, please do so. But on behalf of SIPFA, I would like to thank you all for your time and your expertise. And I hope that as we go through the year sort of towards COP26, we will we'll be following this on and looking at all the developments within this specific area. Thank you all very much, and I wish you all a good afternoon.